about to join us, so I think we'll probably just get started just now. My name's Anne Keenan. I'm the National Officer for Education for the EIS. I'm delighted to be welcoming you this evening for this webinar, and I'd really like to thank you for joining us and coming along, because I think we all appreciate that this has been a particularly busy term for all of you. And it's great that you've set aside the time to participate in the webinar on online and remote teaching and learning. This webinar follows on from a series of webinars in which we've looked at EIS guidance on curriculum and pedagogy in the context of the pandemic, and we've also had a session where we looked at guidance that we had produced on blended and remote learning and teaching prior to the Christmas break. Now, those previous webinars focused on key principles underpinning these unique forms of delivery, and we really emphasised the fact that we were looking at these contingency models of education which we've put in place really because we want to ensure continuity in teaching and learning in the unique context of COVID-19. And I think every one of us here would acknowledge that they're not a replacement or a substitute for face-to-face learning, but we're trying to adapt and adopt models and trying to meet learners' needs and deliver and ensure that that continuity of teaching is ongoing. Some of you may have attended the previous sessions, and if so, that's great. If you haven't been able to, then they are available on the EIS website for you to view at your leisure. So having taken some time previously to look at EIS advice and guidance, we really wanted to devote some time to allow you as members to come together and share your experiences of what teaching in the remote context has been like. And although some pupils have started to make their way back to the classroom at the moment, I know that a large number of you who'll be here tonight will still be preparing lessons and delivering learning and teaching remotely. So this evening we're going to reflect on the experience of the last 2 months. We're going to take some time to share practice and then explore the ways in which you have all been supporting children and young people across the country. Next slide please, Rob. So I've set up in this slide just an outline of what the next 90 minutes is going to look like. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by colleagues from all over Scotland. We're going to hear first of all from Jodie Barclay. Jodie is a member of the EIS Education Committee, and she is currently working in a pedagogy team in Dundee. Jodie is going to share with us the practical guidance which she has been part of developing in Dundee, as well as the supports which have been put in place for teachers in the delivery of remote teaching and learning in her authority. So we're all really looking forward to hear what's been happening in that part of the country. We're then going to move to another part, and we're going to move down to West Lothian to hear from Mary Green, who is an EIS learning rep, and Mary teaches in a school in Livingston. She's going to tell us about the collegiate approach which they've adopted in their school to ensure that the delivery of remote provision was working for everyone in their school community. So some really interesting points to share from Mary, and we're looking forward to that. And then finally, we're travelling away up to the north of Scotland, and we welcome Stephen Graham and Donna MacDonald from Esgoyle, and they're going to tell us all about the study support webinars which they've put in place as part of the national e-learning offer in conjunction with Education Scotland and the Scottish Government. This provision has been established to respond to the unique circumstances in which we find ourselves, and I understand that that will be running until June 2021. And Stephen's also going to share with us some top tips from his experience of delivering in this context. And then we're going to take some time to put the floor over to you. We've requested in advance some questions that members might have had arising from their own experience, and we've had some of those that we've received in advance. We're also going to ask anybody who's got questions arising from anything that's coming up through the session just to put that in the chat, and we'll try and pick that up in the Q&A session at that point. And then finally, I'm delighted to welcome Amy Moran, who is one of the EIS organisers, who's going to tell us about ongoing campaigns that we have on workload and health and safety issues that we're pursuing nationally. So we've got a busy 90 minutes ahead of us. And just before I hand you over to Jodie to allow us to get started, just want to make sure that everybody is on mute during the presentations, and as Rob has indicated, that we are recording this session, so I'm sure you'll all be familiar with online etiquette that we've had to develop over the last year. So thanks very much. I hope you enjoy the session, and I'll pass over now to Jodie to get us started. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. As Anne said, I'm Jodie Barclay. I'm from Dundee and I'm part of a pedagogy team. My background is primary teaching, and normally in my role in the pedagogy team we'd be supporting specific schools, but throughout lockdown we've been working on supporting teachers with remote learning. So we've made guidance documents for teachers, for parents and pupils throughout this. If we can move on, thank you, Rob. Thanks. So the first part is about the teacher guidance that we've made, and we looked at the practicalities of remote learning to begin with. So in Dundee we are a Microsoft authority, so everyone has access to Teams. So what we've done is we have a team where we've got every member of staff on that team, and we post all our things on there so that everyone can get access to it. We also have a channel within that team where we have resources that we create that people can use, and we have a sharing channel so that if anyone's created something that they think would be benefits to other people, they can post it there too. That's helpful because it means we don't have people in individual schools creating the same things over and over again. So we do have that opportunity to share across the city. So thank you. Our first one then was just looking at the practicalities. So this was way back at the beginning of the second lockdown. We took what we'd learned from the first one and we kind of gave advice to everyone. So we talked about what remote learning was, the different forms that it could take, such as check-ins, live streaming, recorded assessments, or just online presence and things. It was important to know the expectations of staff and what we wanted the learners to do. We also have a digital support team, which, like our resources team, is for all staff across Dundee, and they post lots of videos and tutorials and things on how to use all the different platforms, because although we do have Teams for everyone, some schools have chosen to use different online platforms, so they've got lots of videos and things to help you with that on there. We can move on. Thank you. So it was important that we had all that, so the staff had the kind of background as to what they were to do. It was a reminder about the balance between online and offline learning as well, and to keep in contact with your learners and to know how things were going for them. Schools offered paper versions when we were looking at barriers for learning, when kids didn't have access to online materials because they didn't have devices or they might have not had Wi-Fi's. So we set up a little network where kids could visit the school and they would be provided with things they can have. We also looked a little bit at well-being, pupil well-being, involving the social aspects of education and the physical aspects, thinking about the GIRFEC principles, and awareness that we couldn't expect kids to sit at computers all day, regardless of their age. We also talked about teacher well-being as well, a reminder to work collegiately and make sure that you're making the most of stage partners or learning partners, or that if you didn't have a partner to work with at school, that you used the team that we'd set up, because that was an opportunity to work collegiately too. We also listened to a lot of anxiety that people had regarding live streaming, and we made it very clear that it wasn't an expectation, it was something that you would do voluntary. And if people wanted to, that was fine, but also it was also fine if they didn't want to. But for people who were wanting to do it, again, there was guidance set up, and there was also help, tutorials and things in order to get them to do that well. So we made sure that we had all of that. So the next thing we looked at then, after the practicalities of it, was thinking about the pedagogy of remote learning. Move on. Thank you. So first thing we thought about was looking at the organisation of it all, the timings, the availability that you would have throughout your week, and how to set it up so that it ran as best as it could. We talked about a variety of home learning, thinking of the levels of independence and the access to resources that our learners would have. We gave examples of different types of learning under the headings design-based activities, social activities, investigative activities, and play-based activities. And that was just a reminder to teachers that there were things that could be done away from the computers. You might set the learning online, but then the actual learning episode would happen away from the technology. Not all remote learning has to be online learning, and it was just a reminder of that. And we also gave advice on how to record your own content, as I said. When we looked at pedagogical approaches, it was just a reminder to people of what makes high quality learning and teaching successful in the classroom can be applied online too. It could be applied and incorporated into the remote learning. It's just thinking about it in a different way. So we noticed from, again, the first lockdown, people were sending out work and maybe it didn't have success criteria or an example of what the work would look like. And so the learners were unclear as to what they were to do and what the steps to success were. So something as simple as adding learning intentions and success criteria just helped make it much more manageable, and the learners were able to do it independently. Differentiation, again, if you wouldn't just provide one resource in class, don't just provide the one thing online. Think about what your learners need in order to complete their tasks and try and provide it as best you can. When we're talking about assessment, we're saying think creatively about how you're going to assess, but also plan time for that feedback. Don't forget that you have to give the feedback, so therefore make sure you've given time for it. It might be providing a little bit less learning so that you're incorporating the time for the feedback, but the feedback's important. When we're talking about resources, you had to be creative and provide alternatives, what we would have access to at school, they're not going to be available at home. So when we're talking about resources, it's not just technology, but that is a big factor, obviously, if they have devices and Wi-Fi and access to that. But even we can't take for granted things like pencils and paper and things like that at home. So we had to make sure we were thinking about how we provided for those. Consolidation was about reminding people that you had to make time for practicing and overlearning new skills, as well as revisiting prior learning. Not every piece of learning had to be a new piece of learning, but when we do introduce new learning, we have to give time to practice that. Perhaps more time than we would normally give in class, because we do have that distance between us. The context for learning, we felt, allowed for more personalisation and choice, because learners can choose how to demonstrate their learning. So perhaps working from home kind of expanded that a little bit. When do all our learners have to produce the same thing at the end to show us what they've learned, or can they be a little bit more creative with it? Thank you, Rob. So the last thing was about supporting our learners for the pedagogy part. We thought about how quality teaching is key. That's the best we could do, give high quality teaching. You've got to take account of the age and stage and development when you're planning. We've got to remember that it is independent learning, so we're putting strategies in place for support. Not to forget that peer interactions are a big part of learning. So are we given opportunities for those? It could just be uploading your work and having your classmates comment on it. It could be arranging a meeting where they get in small groups and get to chat to one another. So it's making time for those interactions. We also, again, access was a big one. Know what the barriers to learning are. Know what our learners need in order to move on. So the next thing we looked at was planning. So we had looked at the practicalities of getting organised, the pedagogy that you needed to put in place. So how are we going to plan our remote learning? We had a little training session that we put on, and there is a link to that there. The key things from the training session were that we looked at synchronous and asynchronous learning, the pros and cons of both. Both have a place, but it's depending on what it is you want to get across. We looked at the different types of home learning. We looked at blended learning, because now that the senior phase are coming back, that's a little bit more pertinent now, because those practical subjects, the kids are in a little bit more, and then learning from home. So that's about the blended learning. We used the EEF framework of activate, explain, practice, reflect, and review as a planning tool. So that was the one that we used. Thank you. So this was just an outline of what each of those were. So the activate was about the review prior learning and prepare to learn something new. Explain is the teaching element, how are you going to get that across? Practice was the independent element that gets done by the learner. Reflect is about the assessment and the feedback that they get. And then the review is the application of the learning, which takes place a while after. We've got a primary example here, which is about Dundee. It's based on a novel that we know, it's a primary 7 one, so we know all our primary 7s actually have access to this book, so we're all gifted them. So this was a good one to use because we knew that they could have access to that book. The secondary one is based on a drama lesson. So again, there's a little lesson there, there's a link to the sway and an outline of the lessons. It's not one-off lessons, they are a series of learning episodes. So one of those frameworks would take place over maybe a week or 2 weeks. So the next thing we thought about was parental guidance, so how we could help parents and keep them up to date. So we started by, again, going back to just explaining what remote learning was. Our advice was shared on Twitter, on the pedagogy team Twitter, but also individual schools tweeted this out too. So it was just about what remote learning involves. And then on the next page, thank you, it was just what they could do to support. There was a big emphasis on parents are there to help but not teach. So there's things that they could do, like help with set up routines, keep their kids motivated and look after their health and well-being. The teaching aspect would come from the teachers. And then finally on that part, we had frequently asked questions. So we asked our schools if they had been in contact with any parents, if there was any worries they had, and these were the frequently asked questions that came out about again, about the motivation, kids not wanting to get up and get involved, how to keep them focused, and how to overcome anxieties about making mistakes and things. We found that became a big worry again with our learners. They kind of lost that growth mindset where they knew that we learn from our mistakes and they worried about getting it wrong because they were then having to post things online and things like that. So it was about helping promote growth mindset with them. And then finally, what we had is some pupil videos. So these are just short videos and there are links to them there that you can click on later. They're only 3 or 4 minutes long. And again, they were shared on the online platforms on Twitter and things with schools. But they're just little videos. There's a primary one and a secondary one about planning for learning at home. So what the kids can do to get themselves ready to learn. Just little hints and tips for them. The one in the middle was about stuck strategies for working at home. So again, that one's more primary based, but it's for looking at and thinking, well, if I don't know what to do in this task, what am I going to do about that? Because the teacher's not there to ask like they normally would be. So just little videos that are helpful for our kids. So that's what we've been working on in Dundee to help support our teachers.
Thanks very much, Jodie. Really interesting presentation there. And I think some key messages coming out of that, particularly listening to the focus on health and well-being for teachers as well, and that importance of trying to manage workload, because I know that certainly from an EIS perspective, that's been a lot of the kind of concerns that have been raised so far, is how am I managing to balance this and balance these workload issues. And particularly issues around collegiality that you've spoken about there, because I think sometimes when we're all working in our houses on our own, we forget to reach out to people, and you know, as we would do in a school, you might walk down the corridor and speak to someone. So it's just remembering that you can still work in a collegiate fashion, albeit that you're in different places at the moment and challenging times. So thanks very much. And I would say that the presentations and the videos that Jodie has referred to will all be available. We'll put them up online so that people can access them at their leisure. We were obviously mindful of time this evening and wanted to preserve that as much as we could. So we'll have that available so that you can access. But thanks very much, Jodie. That was great. And I think the discussions around collegiality and that important aspect of it really take us into Mary's presentation now and what's been happening in West Lothian. So Mary, I'll hand over to you at this point. Thanks.
Fantastic, thanks, Anne. I'm just going to share my screen, so just bear with me 2 seconds. Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to the meeting tonight. Thanks for coming along. My name's Mary Green. I am a primary teacher in West Lothian, and I'm also the West Lothian EIS Learning Representative. So my part of the presentation is about taking a collegiate approach to digital learning. Part of my role this year was to be the digital lead, so I was in a prime position to take this forward within our school. And I also did a Move and Learning online course during the summer, a cross-union one, which was fantastic preparation for this as well. Part of my role since the summer has been working with home learners as well, children that are at home and receiving remote learning when the rest of the children are in. So there's been lots of different aspects to this that I'm taking forward within the school. But as I say, I'm a primary teacher and that's my primary role. So the first thing that we needed to do was to think about where our influences were coming from. We looked at this when we came back from the first lockdown, and we also looked at it again in August, before the lockdown that we just went into as well. So we had a look to see who do we need to hear from, who do we need to take into account. And as you can see, there are lots of different influences. It was really important for us to make sure that everybody had a similar goal and that everybody's needs were being taken into account. So what we did was we gathered lots of views during the first lockdown and after. So we had a parent survey that was sent out by ourselves in school, and also a council-wide one that we looked at the data from. We had virtual meetings for our parent council. We arranged drop-in sessions for parents, and that was particularly to do with ICT, because we were finding there was a lot of ICT issues, and that was impacting children's learning experiences at home and the families' learning experiences at home. So we did arrange those once a month for parents to drop into, and also through the council we had discussions at the CLPL steering group about having parent sessions for ICT, so that support was wider than just at school level. And the council have been fantastic for putting that together. There really is brilliant material out there for parents now. We did a pupil survey. Again, the council did a survey and we did a school one. And our school one was quite in depth and it was quite revealing, because we have insights on Teams. Last lockdown, we only used Teams, we used learning journals for our infants. Whereas this time we're using Seesaw, so we can see instantly who's on. But when we looked at the insights on Teams, it didn't match what our pupil surveys were saying. There was a lot that was missed. So for example, if children were logging in on an iPhone, it wasn't logging that on Teams on our insights. It was looking like they hadn't been on. So it was really important to get that deep view of how our pupils were feeling, and also to compare that to our parent feedback that we were getting as well, to see if that was matching up and what we could do to help. We had to get our staff views. So we had a school session in August where we all sat down together and we looked at how we were going to take digital learning forward, because what we didn't want to do was to go back to being in school and all the online learning that the children had done and all those skills weren't being utilised. So we had a school session to look at what we were going to do to take that forward in the school. And we also looked at that point at potential actions that we wanted to take for blended learning scenarios and remote learning scenarios, so that we had a plan and an input into what had gone well and what we wanted to keep, and then things that had been tricky and what we could do. We have staff Teams pages, including a staff room to have a chat in a more informal way. And we also had a whole school one, so that everybody had access to all the same information. And then we had subgroups as well for people that were working together. And also we needed to make sure that we had regular contact with each other. Messages on phones, regular phone calls, just lots of different ways of being there for each other and working together and trying to keep that as positive as we possibly could. We had leadership team discussions before the CAT sessions and after the CAT sessions to see the strategic overview for where we wanted to go, so that we knew where is it that we want to be and how are we going to get there together as a team. We've got digital leaders within the school and within the cluster, and through that role within the school and the cluster, we have worked with individual members of staff and groups of members of staff to upskill them in the areas that they found the trickiest last time or moving forward. We had all our council feedback that we reflected on and then made improvements based on that where needed. We had lots of professional reading through all sorts of websites and social media sites, and lots of academic work that's coming through, particularly to do with e-learning, that we're taking on board and looking forward to take forward with our children. Lots of them to do with mental health as well, so that we could incorporate aspects of that. And also went to union meetings and took part in those so that we could get the information from the union through the websites, but also on a more personable basis through the virtual meetings as well, and ask any questions that we needed to get clarity. So why did we do this? It was really to make sure that we had a shared vision and understanding, because if we all know where we want to get to, then it opens that opportunity to be creative with it. It means that we're all trying to get there, but we're open to different ideas of how to do that, depending on people's strengths and home situations as well. We wanted to make sure that there was equity across the stages and the classes and the subjects. Now, I'm in quite a small school, it's a single stream school, so we didn't have a stage partner to work with. So we worked in early first and second quite a lot of the time, but then we also worked with primary 1 to 3 together because they were using the same platform, and primary 4 to 7 because they were using the same platform as well. But we wanted to make sure that the children had equal opportunities through the remote learning. So we were all doing things differently in different lessons and different subjects based on the children's learning needs, but all children were getting experience of live calls, all children were getting experience of recorded videos, all children were getting experience of using assignments, all that sort of thing. We needed to address issues and make changes, and one of the things that I certainly found hardest during the first lockdown when I was teaching primary 4, it was last year, one of the things that I found hardest was if somebody came with a problem, and I found it really difficult to not take that personally. So by looking at things in this way, through gathering all that information, it becomes less personal and more of a collegiate issue that we can make changes on. It becomes a more positive thing. Rather than our criticism, it's something that we can work on and make better. And that was particularly valid when we were hearing from the pupils directly when we came back. We felt it was really important to reflect on our strengths because, as I've just said, you know, there's a lot of feeling that we're being criticised over things when things aren't going so well. And we don't often stop and think about the things that are going really well. And it was a good opportunity for us to do that. We wanted to debrief and reflect, and this was, I think, probably the most valuable thing for us as a staff and for our pupils. There were a lot of pupils came back after the first lockdown and really didn't want to talk about it. We were doing emotion recovery schemes to try and support our children with their mental health, and some were very happy to speak about things, but some really didn't want to. So what we did was we spoke to each class and we just asked them what's gone well, what didn't go so well, what was easy, what was hard, what did you like, what did you not like, what happened. And what we found was by doing that from a digital approach, from an ICT angle, was actually that the children then started to open up about their emotions and about their feelings about what happened. And it really was a very good opportunity for almost like a class counselling session. And again, at our staff meeting, it was like a staff counselling session where we did have that opportunity to be very open about things. And it really did help us in moving on and making it better together. We wanted to make decisions about how to utilise our online learning opportunities when we were in school. So with many of our classes, our teachers continued using the online learning tools, incorporating those into their day-to-day lessons, and also encouraging children to use them at home, which would then which they would import into their class learning. And it's a fantastic way of preparing the children for using the skills again, not losing those, but upskilling, and also including any children who were at home, that they had access to that as well. And we also wanted to identify opportunities to manage workload, because as we know with the first one, it was all of a sudden everything in one place and our workload went a bit haywire, and I'm sure it's very similar this time with workload. However, what we were able to do was say, where were the major workload issues and what can we do about those? How can we reduce those? How can we support one another? How can we make that easier? And one of the things that we did from that was we put into our afternoons a daily challenge, which a member of the senior leadership team took forward. And we provided children with a variety of different lessons across different subjects away from the core subjects, which gave them opportunities for creativity that they could dip in and dip out of. And that also gave our members of staff an afternoon or an hour and a half in the afternoon to then be preparing lessons with videos and audios, and took that pressure off. So the next few slides are from the Moving Online course that I did over the summer, which was some of the best advice that we got for planning remote learning. So it's really just things to consider with moving forward. And one of the things that really helped us with focusing our efforts was to make sure that our learner was at the centre. When we're planning e-learning, it's very easy to have the technology take over. But we just wanted to refocus and look at our learners and make sure that we were able to help them in every way that we could and make a way around those technology issues wherever we could. We wanted to make sure that we included lots of different learning styles, particularly for children with any ASN needs, or for example with dyslexic tendencies, looking at how we could support them and how we could incorporate things for all children, but to make it easier for particular children or particular learning needs. And we also felt, like Jodie was saying earlier, about taking time away from the screen. A lot of these activities are away from the screen if we mix them up as well, so that children are getting a balance. One of the things that I found hardest as a digital lead was copyright laws. There are a lot of copyright laws out. Well, there's lots of copyright laws, but they're quite complicated. So one site that has been really helpful is Creative Commons, that you can go to, and the images on there have been shared for public use. And we just had a quick look at how we would credit those images and how we would use those. And also we did lessons with our children on that as well, particularly going into this online learning world, to make sure that they were protecting themselves too. So during our staff sessions, we looked at our strengths and development needs, and we thought about things that we could do now that we couldn't do before. We thought about things that we'd enjoyed, a success that we had, and then other things that we wanted to share that had happened. And it was really important for us to really reflect on that and see how far we'd come to build up people's confidence with our online learning. So as I said before, we were looking at how we can move forward rather than going back to being in the classroom. We want to move forward into a joined learning experience, incorporating remote learning. There's lots of questions here that we talked about. One of the ones that I wanted to talk about was the issues that we had for things like house points and assemblies, and a lot of the things that we did to encourage children and motivate children. How were we going to do that with the restrictions being in place? And that was a really interesting discussion that we had, and we managed to come up with lots of really good virtual ways to do things, or paperless ways to do things, or ways that the children weren't having to share resources or all go to a communal area to do things that we had done before. So we found these questions really important for getting that shared view. We also had a put parent consultations in there and meet the teacher. We did those online this year and they were actually really good. We had video calls, and if we didn't have a video call, if the video failed for some reason, we phoned the parents straight away, so they had the same window of time and we were still reporting to them, and that was really good. It was very effective for our parents and for our teachers, and it meant that we didn't have to go back and then try and see 35% of our parent body afterwards. One of the things that we do still need to have a look at is curriculum afternoons, including our parents and some of the learning opportunities that we're doing. They're seeing what their children are doing, but what we do is we use our Twitter feed to help to share those experiences, and we also have our house captains who have run an online assembly, and we've had pupil voices where we gathered lots of the children's videos about things that they'd been doing at home, and we shared those with our children at assembly, and also we sent home with permissions to parents for them to see that and to share that, and so that the children could see their friends as well. So after we'd had a look at those, we thought about our own learning needs. And as the digital lead, I was able to plan some sessions for staff with communal needs that they had, and also help people to get to where they needed to if they had an individual need to do. And it was just really good for people to say, right, I need to do this so that if this happens again, or so that I can do this, this is where I need to go. So sometimes people were working together on those, sometimes they're working independently. We had people going to national courses like this one, for example, and through the union. We had council courses that people could go to, and again, across our cluster, we had a lead there who was helping staff with their needs. And then from that, what we did was we came up with our action plan on what we were going to do, which meant that when we were ready to do this now, we already had that vision. We didn't have any surprises sprung on us. The only thing that changed ever so slightly was the council guidance came out just at the beginning of this lockdown. Well, I think it was 2 weeks before. So we just tweaked things a little bit for there, but we had actually covered most of it, and there was only a tiny little tweak to do. But it did mean that we were ready and prepared to go forward, which has really helped our staff. We were able to provide the relevant training that people needed to upskill them. We were able to address most difficulties experienced by families and prepare changes to make online learning easier for them. And what we have found is for our drop-in sessions is that we have had fewer and fewer and fewer parents coming along because they don't feel they need that support anymore. They know that we're there to support them if they need us, but they haven't been utilising us for online difficulties the same way they were last time. And just to finish off, just to share that our school had really high levels of engagement and really positive feedback from pupils, staff and parents with this lockdown. We've just finished our council survey and our school survey, and it's really shown that with careful planning and preparation that we are able to address things and move forward in a really positive way. And our pupils, staff and parents have felt more prepared. They're still working really hard. Our workload is still always going to be an issue, but we do feel incredibly supported, and we don't feel afraid to speak up if it's too much or to make exchanges. So one of the key things that we've done to address that is if we're asked to do something else, or if we need to do something else for someone, is that we swap that for something else. Where does that balance come in? And that's been a real focus for us. So thank you very much to everyone for listening. I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Thanks very much, Mary. That's great. And I can already see there's some questions coming up in the chat about house points and assemblies and so on. So we can pick those up when we get to the Q&A session. But some really practical advice there. Really important, again, emphasising that workload issue and the importance of managing this within the confines of the 35-hour working week, if at all, if at all possible. And I know that it's also great to hear you saying that you were reflecting on strengths, because I think it's something that we have to be reminded to do, and focus on all the good things that we're actually been able to deliver and how far we've come in the period of a year with the delivery of this mode of teaching and learning. I don't think if we said to any of us this time last year that we would be sitting having this kind of conversation, we might not have believed it, but here we are a year on down the line. So thanks very much, Mary. We'll come back for further discussions after that. And now we'll have a double act from the Highlands. I'd like to welcome Donald and Stephen, who are joining us and are going to tell us about the National Learning offer that they have through eSchool. So I'll just pass over to, I think, Donald, you're up first.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be here from Stornoway in the Western Isles. I would say sunny Stornoway, but that would be a lie. So my name's John McLeod, and I'm here today with Stephen Graham, and we both work at eSchool, which is part of the Northern Alliance and also part of the National e-learning offer. That first slide shows you an overview of some of the stuff that we've been involved in over the year. It has dramatically changed what we do in eSchool lockdown, and we very much react as things change. We do plan ahead, but then, as we all know, the best plans of mice and men sometimes fall because of change in policy or change in programme. So I'm not going to go through these, but if you want to ask me at any time in the future or even today, we'd be happy to look at that. Next slide. What I'm here to talk to you about today are our study support webinars, which we started last September. And they're deliberately called webinars because they are held online and the learning is delivered in a different way. Just want to emphasize this is not a replacement for the delivery of higher physics. We couldn't do that, and we don't aspire to do that. What this is a replacement for the traditional study support that normally kids might have stayed after school for, or at holiday times come into school. And we know that that's not possible in lockdown. So we're sitting at about 65 courses weekly at the moment. This is some of our data. We're now in excess of 10,000 bookings from 4,000 different pupils from 307 schools across Scotland. These are the evening webinars, which were the original model of webinars. Again, emphasising that we're complementing what's going on in school and adding to that. Therefore, this is run, they start at 5 o'clock and go on. I think the last one started at 7 o'clock in the evening. And you can see there the demographic of where the uptake for the evening webinars has been. And we'll move on to our daytime webinars. And the data there, they only started recently. In the last lockdown, we decided to provide the same kind of opportunity for pupils during the day as was available in the evening. And we're now engaging with another 600 learners who come to the webinars during the day as opposed to in the evenings. We try not to run them too early in the day so the young folks don't have to be up to attend. Next slide. So what is a webinar? I've mentioned before, it's to complement school teaching of a subject. You can have a large group or larger than normal. These are the kind of typical numbers we see. Most are around 15, I would say, up to 40, 50 pupils. You can guess that's maths and English that end up over the 100. 2 teachers on most calls, and it's a very small class, with 1 teacher who delivers the teaching, and that's their main focus for the class, and the other teacher manages the chat. That may seem like an easy option, and I can testify personally that's not an easy option. You have hot fingers and they exercise your brain answering all their questions from I can't get into the chat to my friend wants to join, can she join now? Which the answer is no, because it's not the time to ask that question. Flipped learning is posted before the lesson, which children are meant to, and I say meant to, access before the lesson. And we also have legacy materials that we harvest from the webinars that are shared then with West OS and the supported learning space with Education Scotland. So any video that's produced for the webinar goes to West OS, any printed materials or text goes to supported learning. How do you join a webinar? Pretty straightforward. Go into our website. Grow ID is essential, and I know that can be an issue, but that is the way we work. And young people, as you know, every young person in Scotland has a Grow ID that they can access, and many of them have from other backgrounds. Go to the sign up page and just say which webinars you want to attend. You get an automated response, and then you're dropped into that team where the good thing with this is, say if you signed up today to the maths webinar, you have access to all the materials that are in the maths webinars since last September. So I always say to kids, never too late to join. And just to mention in passing, we don't record the webinars. In some ways it'd be really nice if we could, because you would have canned learning there. But for safeguarding reasons, because children and young people are on the webinars and can be identified, we don't record them. Next slide. What are our pupils telling us? These are quotes. We have an 8-week cycle of evaluation where the pupils fill in a very straightforward evaluation. Our overall, the rating of our overall experience is 4.6 out of 5 from the young people who attend the webinars. Numbers stay high, and we're pleased to see that, because we thought, you know, how there's been government decisions and government announcements and holidays. So we do notice the weekend holidays, they make a slight difference, but on the whole, our numbers are staying very healthy. Next slide. So what next? There's always next steps in education. We're almost in full coverage of subjects and a good number of levels. We are currently seeking confirmation of funding to run until just the beginning of June, so that pupils can have support right up to that point when the assessments need to go into SQA. My life currently is taken over with an Easter Study School. I think that now reads as actually 62 courses with 3 live webinar inputs in these courses over 2 weeks that we're going to be going live with in the next couple of days. Booking will, I'd hope to go live today when I wrote this, but certainly by tomorrow. And I'd ask you, when you see the adverts, please promote, because the more young people we can get into, the better. Sorry to rush, but I'm just aware of time. I'll pass over to Stephen.
Thank you, Donald. Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Graham. I'm one of the deputy heads here at eSchool, again based in Stornoway. I'm a maths teacher by background, so it's good to be with you. I'm just going to share a wee bit about my own experience of online learning. We've all been on a journey when it comes to online learning, and we're all at different points on that journey, and we're all learning. And I think the main lesson for me today is not to wear this shirt again when I'm online, because it looks as if it's an optical illusion when it's just a plain check shirt. So that's, you know, we're all learning, and nobody here is claiming to you know, be a guru or to have all the answers, because we're all here to learn from each other. And I think that's an important point to stress. So necessity really has been the mother of invention when it comes to remote teaching for us here at eSchool. And with the disruption that lockdown has brought, it's generated a great deal of innovation. And what I'm looking to do just in the few minutes that I've got here is just to say a wee bit about how I, as a teacher, and my colleagues have sought to improve and increase engagement when it comes to an online environment when you're delivering remotely. We all know what it's like to feel as if we're teaching into the void. And also I'm looking to say a wee bit about safeguarding as well. So there'll be quite a bit of text on the slides. I'm not looking to talk through each bullet point at all, but the ones I don't refer to, they're really just there to act as food for thought and maybe generate some discussion at the Q&A session later on. So I mean, what you see there, I mean, good teaching is good teaching, and that is true. But we all recognise that you need a whole new skill set when it comes to delivering to learners who are not in the same room as you. I think it all really comes down to planning. Planning is so important when you are delivering online, because that online environment amplifies any mistakes you make, or if you are unprepared, it's going to be very clear to those who are on the receiving end of the lesson that you are. Whereas in the classroom setting, and I speak from experience as much as anything else, you can pull something from the shelf and you can just very quickly wing it at certain points of the lesson. Whereas when you're online, that's a bit more difficult to do. I think, trying to keep things non-verbal. I mean, verbal interaction is obviously something that we would want, but I would look for that to be rich and meaningful learning opportunities, rather than having 20 different pupils answering a one-word question, either in the chat or in if they were putting their microphones on, for example. So make use of hands up features to allow pupils to indicate that they are okay with a concept that you've maybe explained, or that they've reached a certain point in the lesson or in the questions or the task that's been set. Making use of these non-verbal cues can save a lot of trawling through the chat box, and also just avoids kind of disrupting the flow of the lesson. By all means, build in interactive forums and quizzes. They're excellent for diagnostics before the learning begins, and also as exit tickets to show you that your learners have indeed taken on board what you've been trying to get over to them. So next slide, please. I think it's really important for us to put ourselves in the learner's shoes. I'd imagine that none of us have been on the receiving end of an online lesson. And I think it's really important to consider what it's like, from their perspective and what their experience has been. Now, I remember as an NQT doing an exercise with a class that I had, asking them 3 questions. What makes a good maths teacher? What makes a good maths lesson? And what makes a good maths pupil? And with all the words, and answers that they gave, we kind of made up a display that sat outside my classroom door for quite a number of years. And last year I did a similar exercise with learners that I had in an online class, and asked them the question, what makes for a good online lesson? What makes for a good online teacher? And what makes for a good online pupil? And it's much just what you would expect. Again, going back to we're not looking to reinvent the wheel here, but I think again it stresses the points I was making previously about that you'd have seen on the last slide around chunking the lessons, building in interaction, not just between the teacher and the learners, but allowing for the learners to interact with one another. Again, just making sure that there's engaging content. So if we can move on to the next slide, that was just asking them what they would associate with a good online teacher. Again, stressing, the fact that they need to be organized. And I think, I was saying earlier on about the importance of planning. That's not to say that an online lesson has to be a script and you have to stick to the script. I think here we see, as we would expect from all teachers, that the learning should, deviate from the script if need be, if that's what you see is required based on what your learners are telling you. So by all means, yes, be planned, but don't be afraid to deviate from the plan if circumstances are telling you that you should. So I think it's helpful for us to just see these 2 slides, just to see the kind of words and phrases that the pupils themselves came up with what they would be looking for at the receiving end. If we could move on. Again, I'm just going to throw a few hints and tips onto the screen here just now. And we've heard a few of the other speakers talk about the importance of taking a collegiate approach to learning your craft. Nobody should be, on this journey on their own. So draw on the experience of colleagues, use these networks, wider networks maybe that you're part of, find out what's working well for colleagues, what's not working well. You can share good practice, you can observe colleagues at times as well and just see them in action if there's something in particular that you want to maybe learn from them. In the current context, with us delivering to learners at home, you'll see there the second last point there, there will be people listening in to you. So just to be aware of that, the banter that you might have as a teacher with the learners in the class might not translate across the airwaves in the same way, and just to be aware that there can be people, others listening in the background. And that's, we can say that we would want for the pupils to be in a private space. That's not always possible. We have to bear that in mind. It's not everyone who's got a suitable learning environment. When we are in lockdown, they don't necessarily have a room of their own that they can go to. So we have to just accept that others may well be in the room within earshot. So just something to bear in mind. And the last one I would say is the most important. We can feel the need to almost be a performing seal if we are, if we have a scheduled session of online learning or remote teaching. There's nothing wrong at all with you putting your camera off and having something else on the screen. And you can then just spend that time either monitoring what the pupils are doing or, engaging, giving feedback or whatever it might be. Don't feel that you need to be on screen, for the whole duration of the session that you've allocated to a particular class. There's nothing wrong with you looking to replicate what you would do in the normal classroom setting, which would be circulating around the class or looking at pupil work at your own desk or whatever it might be. So I think it's just something I would want to stress, just to take a break from being on the screen. I'm sure that we're all a bit conscious at times of how we come across on the screen, and it's not that you need to be on the screen for the whole time. But at the same time, obviously, face-to-face interaction, you want to put a face to the voice that you're hearing as well. A few IT tips as well. Just mentioning things in the passing. Donald mentioned the flipped learning that's part of our webinar model. If you are doing that, keep it simple. Don't feel that you need to burn yourselves out developing new materials. Use what's already there. It's a relatively, once you learn how to do it, adding a voiceover to a PowerPoint, for example, that you already have, can be something you can share with learners and have them access at any point of the week, because we all know that not everyone has the devices or has the broadband connectivity to be able to tune in at a set time. I think managing behavior is a particularly important one. Something that we've seen is that quite often a comment can set the tone for how the rest of the chat and the lesson goes. And the comment might be, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but if it's off topic, if you don't nip it in the bud and delete it, it can then set the tone, and you find that every other person in the class has come in off the back of that with their own innocuous comment that's diverting people's attention away from what it ought to be on. So just make sure that you familiarize yourselves with how to manage permissions in terms of what pupils can and cannot do, and that you know how to delete comments so that you are in control ultimately of what's going on. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Bob. So you'll see there linked towards the bottom of that blue circle, eSchool's principles, safeguarding principles and practice document. So when these slides are made available to you, you'll have that link there. When you are delivering online, there's a lot of things that can go wrong potentially, and you've just got to think ahead and take steps to try to avoid anything going wrong if at all possible. So, we don't want to eliminate, we don't want to not do what needs to be done just because that's the safest course of action. You want to manage the risk. I think one thing that we found is using Glow ensures that there are no unwanted guests and that you know exactly who is who. There's nobody's acting as an imposter under a pseudonym. It's very clear who's doing what, who's in the call, and working within that walled garden of Glow is something that we have found invaluable during the lockdown. I think particularly for yourself and for learners, if you are, for example, on a Teams call, I'm not so sure if you can do it in Zoom and in other platforms, but I'm sure you can do other things. But using background effects protects other people who are in the household with you. I mean, we're all shacked up at home with other people, and it's very often, you've got people walking across behind you and so on, especially if there are young people in the household. So I think showing colleagues and learners how to apply background effects blocks off anything that's going on in the background, so that nobody in the household is going to be broadcast to your whole class. So I think that's something really important to add, if at all possible. Worst case scenario is that a pupil shares something to the whole class that they shouldn't. So make sure that you manage screen share permissions carefully, depending on what platform you use. So these are the things that I would be particularly mindful of. Again, join codes, depending on how you're adding learners to, whether it's a Google Classroom or whether it's a team, a Microsoft team. If you are sharing a join code, just be mindful that once the code is out there, it can be shared and anybody can add themselves to the team. So you might want to just change the code once it's been shared with your own class. So just things like that. But the safeguarding document goes into things in more detail. It's not an exhaustive document, but it's an overview of just things to consider. Now, it's very easy to focus on the negatives associated with online learning, and I know we'd all love to be face-to-face with the vast majority of our young people, shall we say. And we would all agree, even though online learning is the bread and butter of what we do at eSchool, we would all agree that having a teacher in front of a class face-to-face is the best best case scenario. But I just wanted to highlight that an online environment can be a place for some learners where they feel quite comfortable. And I'm just thinking of my own experience here. In a normal classroom setting, very often a learner would rather miss out than stand out. So rather than raise their hand when you've explained something and say, please sir, I really didn't understand that, I don't get it, can you explain it again? And say that in front of their peers, they would just rather stay silent, and it's only further down the line that you realize that they haven't understood what you've been trying to explain. Whereas in an online environment, they can discreetly let you as a teacher know that they've been struggling, and you then, without naming and shaming anybody, can then explain the concept again or do an example or whatever it might be. And as such, it's just an example of how the online environment can allow some young people to flourish. Here at eSchool, we've got a pilot project running just now for interrupted learners, very often with high anxiety, real social issues, a lot of, they've been out of school for a long time, and they're very, very isolated, and COVID has exacerbated a lot of the issues that they've been experiencing. But in bringing them, allowing them to join an online learning community, they can join that on their own terms. If they have issues around people seeing them, they can join with their camera off. They don't need to interact with their teacher or their peers verbally. They can do it, through text and email and using the chat box and so on. So, it can be a way of reaching out to some people for whom school has not been a particularly positive experience, or for whom circumstances have just, you know, led to them, you know, disengaging from the school system completely. So it's just to bear, you know, to bear in mind that everything that we've been doing over the last few months should have a legacy, and you know, we don't want to do away with all of the learning that we've learned over the last few months, and just to consider ways in which you can apply that practice in you know, better times and better days when our learners are in school in front of us. So that's really the bulk of what Donald and I were going to say. As I said, there were a number of things on the slides that I didn't really touch on, but should you wish to ask us any questions on these points, please do that in the Q&A. And you'll see there a note about our emails and the eSchool website as well, which details the full breadth of what we do, both by way of our lockdown offer and also the way in which we support schools to find specialist teachers when there are none available locally. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in the Q&A shortly.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thanks, Donald. That was really excellent information there about the offerings and some helpful tips. Particularly, I think I'd need to learn myself how to manage the chat function. I think that sounds an interesting one for many reasons, particularly when I'm engaging with my friends, I think. So thanks very much. We'll move now, I think, to the Q&A session. So this is your chance to put questions to our speakers. So we've had one question that has been sent into us that I'll move to initially, and then we'll pick up some of the ones that have been coming through the chat function as well. We've done this in the past, and when we haven't had enough time to get to all of the questions, we've done an FAQ as a follow-up. So don't worry if your question isn't answered tonight, because we are obviously with limited time, but we will come back to you and get those answers circulated after this event. So if we could perhaps move to the first question that I've got, which has come in advance, and that is from Fiona, which is saying, I've not been teaching since lockdown began due to shielding, and have no experience of teaching online. Is there any specific software I need in order to teach online? So I wonder if any of our panel members willing to help out and answer that question.
I'll maybe just come in there. Sorry.
It's Fiona here. Could I just say I'm a supply teacher in primary.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Did everyone hear that? So Fiona's a supply teacher in primary.
Yeah, I'll just maybe say a wee bit about kind of very general, and then I don't know if any of the others want to maybe come in on the specifics of perhaps delivering to primary. But within Glow, all of the tools that you would require should be freely available to you as a teacher.
So in Edinburgh, supply teachers don't have access to Glow. I've already looked into that, and I've been informed by the council that we don't have that. All I know is that Edinburgh schools use Microsoft Teams, but I'm unable to access Glow as a supply teacher.
And are you able, Fiona, to access the Microsoft tenancy that Edinburgh Council have?
I don't know. I'll have to check that. I've been out of work since March.
I'm in the same situation. I believe, though, that if it's through the school that employs you as a supply teacher, right, they will probably provide us with the iPad and all the security that way, rather than through your own equipment.
Right, but would I then have to go to the school to get the iPad then?
I don't know. I was told, I think you'd have to be, first of all, have that opportunity in the first place, and then the school would provide it. And I think you have a special login, which the digital team give you then, which you can then use in other schools as well, connected to other schools. But I think you have, I don't know, I've tried to get work that way.
Yeah, I've been in touch with the digital learning team. I can so I can access certain things, but I can't access Glow. The thing is, I'm short-term supply. So far there's only actually been one offer of work, and I think that was at Rathel, where they wanted someone distance teaching. So I don't know how that would have worked with them getting the equipment they need.
I think it helps if you have a contact in schools
Right.
that you might have worked in the past, but I don't know. So I don't want to occupy this topic.
Can I just come in? Just in West Lothian, we've just set up a supply network within our EIS branch. So if you contact your local EIS, they may be able to put you in touch with other people as well, and speak to the council on your behalf as well.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I was just going to suggest it might be an idea, Fiona, if you speak to your LA secretary. So if you want to email me, and I'll ask Rob to put my email address in the chat, then we could take that up. And same if anybody else, I see there's a number of people saying they're in the same position in different councils, we can try and direct you to the people who might be able to assist you to deal with that difficulty, if that's any help.
That's great, thank you.
No problem. I think we could maybe return to the question that we had for Mary during the conversations about the alternatives that were put in place for assemblies and class points and so on. So Mary, would you like to answer that question?
Sure, yep. So for our assemblies, we started doing them via Teams when we were all in school. So we started off just the senior leadership team, each taking a turn, and myself as digital lead and some of the other lead learners within the school. And we would deliver via Teams to the classrooms on a Friday, all at the same time, and we'd have home learners tapping into that as well. What we have discovered since then, since we've gone into proper lockdown, is that the pre-recorded sway assemblies are actually much better. There's a few much less technical issues. So what we now do is we prepare a short assembly where a member of the leadership team do an introduction, and we have different videos, different activities for children to do that they can dip in and out, and each of our teachers awards a certificate each week to somebody in their class or other children throughout the school, and they just submit a little video that we add in so that the children can all see the certificate winners that week and have those whole school achievements. Our house points, we went really high tech, and we went for a poster on the wall with tally marks. So instead of getting a counter, we decided to give the children 5 tally marks on the poster. So we went to 5 house points because we thought it'd be much more fun for them to do the 4 lines and the flick through. So that went really well. The children just brought their own pen up and did that, and then took it back to their desk. Since we've had the hub children in, we've gone to having individual token tubs with individual token sets. So when they're completing remote learning and uploading that to their teacher, because they're doing that on the computer in the classroom, they're then putting the tokens into their tubs and seeing that achievement throughout the day and throughout the week. Our nurture groups, we've been running them through Teams. While we were in school, we accessed larger spaces than the usual spaces, and we also had some outdoors. When it was in the better weather, the nurture group would go off for a walk because it was children from different classes, so they had to be distanced from each other, and that worked really well. For PE, we did it all outdoor. We had different class challenges, and we had cluster challenges, which was really good. And we also shared lots of plans and resources. We had to obviously put the resources aside for a while, but we'd have sets of resources that then people knew that's my week to go and use those ones with my class. And our house captains, we had meetings on Teams during the day, and also they were accessing it in the evenings as well as part of their homework, and they've been contributing that way as well. So that was just some of the examples that came, well, that I'm not taking the credit, it was all staff in my school, but that's some of the ways that we've combated some of the issues that we've had.
That's great, thanks Mary, and hopefully that answered the question really fully. Thanks for that. A lot of different ideas there. I was up seeing my niece at the weekend. She's in a primary school in West Lothian, and she had been delighted because they have Friday hot chocolate as a reward. And I think she received a sachet of hot chocolate through the post. So that was a bit different as well. So lots of different ways to try and keep people motivated as well. There was a question that had come in about equity, which I think it's probably that I'm just looking at the time. I think probably this is going to be our last question that we'll get to just now, because I think we're moving on and we've still got Amy to hear from. But if we'll deal with this question and we'll come back to the other questions once by written Q&As subsequently. So the question that I've got is around how you manage to support people who don't have access to pencils and jotters at home, and who may have a lot of scarce resources at home. How have you managed to deal with those situations? So I wonder if we can maybe get a kind of cross-panel view on that one.
Hi Anne, I put a little note in the chat function earlier to that, answering that. We had all our schools made up little resource packs, and the packs included jotters and a selection of pens and things that could be collected from the school. If they didn't get collected and we knew there was a need at home, staff would actually deliver them, or a child and family support worker would make sure they were out there. We looked into leaving them in different places around the community too, local shops and things. Obviously libraries were closed as well, which is another community hub, but we got around it by providing them. We also had a delivery of books from the Scottish Book Trust, which again, when we had some people who didn't have books at homes and things, so we managed to get a delivery. They donated them, and we were able to circulate them throughout and hand them round. I know we're lucky in that Dundee's quite a compact city, so nowhere's all that far. I know in other areas it could be some distance that you have to travel from school to school.
Thanks very much, Jodie. Stephen, I don't know if you want to come in about that one.
Yeah, I mean, just our own local authority response was much as Jodie described there. I know our own local school, they provided learning packs, and again, the offer was there for anyone who needed resources. I think the local shop was a collection point for any of that. I think, I mean, there's nothing that, we aren't a school at E-School. The pupils aren't our own, and so we would be relying on local schools to provide in the way that they would have provided in the past, and to come up with ways similar to what Jodie was describing there, having people either deliver materials needed for learning to the pupils, or asking them to come and collect resources or access resources at a kind of central collection point. So I've got nothing really to add to what Jodie said. I don't know if any of the others do.
Thanks, Stephen. Mary or Donald, did you want to come in with anything on that? Anything additional?
No, I think that's been covered.
That's great. So hopefully that's managed to cover some of the questions. I see that the chat function's going, and lots of the answers I'll be putting in the chat function. So that's great. That saves us a bit of time as well, because I don't want to. I appreciate you've set aside a lot of time tonight to come along, and I don't want to keep us back too long. So I'll move on now to Amy Moran, one of our organisers, who's come along and is going to talk about organising the branch at EIS level and national campaigning issues for us. So I'll pass over to Amy now. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Hi everyone, so my name's Amy. I'm an organiser at the EIS, and it's my job to support members and reps in the 7 local associations that I cover. It's been so fab listening to all the other speakers in this webinar. We've really heard just how teachers have delivered over the past year. It's been absolutely fantastic. You've been so crucial to supporting students and families in your communities throughout the pandemic, and I absolutely commend you all. But we also know that this year has been a really challenging time from a professional and a personal perspective. So in this session, I just want to bring you back to that and use this session to think about you and your well-being. We know that your ability to support students relies on your ability to look after yourself and colleagues' well-being. And I know that in reality, teachers don't get enough time to step outside of that and reflect on how things are going for you and your colleagues while you're doing all of this great work. So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about some of the concerns that I've been hearing from some of the members that I work with in my local association, meetings and school meetings, how to work with your colleagues to identify and resolve any issues in a collegiate way, and how you take some of these things forward and connect with us as your organisers to help you do that. So some of the potential concerns that have been coming up: workload. Number one, many members have found that their workload has significantly increased in the last few months. Unfortunately, I've heard members say they're working way into the evenings, the weekends, especially with all of the work that goes into moving some of these things online. And I know it's really easy to slip out of work-life balance when you're working from home. But I do want to take the time to encourage you to try and maintain a routine and some of that discipline. I think that message has definitely come through in some of the other presentations that we've heard today. But if you do find that your workload is becoming unmanageable, then you do have to be really tough and ask yourself, is this sustainable? I know that we're hoping to be back in school soon. I know that we were told yesterday by the First Minister that maybe that's 6 weeks away. That could be at least 6 weeks away, in fact. And that will bring its own challenges, and it'll be a whole new set of learning. So ask yourself, is the way you're working at the minute working for you personally, and is it working for you professionally? Can you continue to deliver at this pace? If you're working in an environment where you're expected to deliver business as usual, plus all of the extras, all of the online learning, then that's something that does need to be raised through your union, and we're here to support you to do that. Live teaching. I just want to make it clear again that there should be no expectation within your school to replicate the working day. The government have said very clearly, remote learning will not replicate face-to-face teaching in style, approach, or hours of delivery. Online learning shouldn't engage students for the entirety of the school day. And you can kind of see that in the quote at the bottom of the screen there. If your school has adopted a policy like that, that can and should be challenged. You do have a voice. It's not reasonable to expect students to be around a screen that long, and it is definitely not reasonable to expect you to be around a screen for that long. For some teachers, you know, for you, if you're sort of thinking, well, for me, I have been doing that and that's not too bad. It might be possible for a minority of teachers. It's certainly not possible to spend that amount of time in front of a screen for the majority of teachers, because, you know, there's all sorts of things to consider, childcare, and I'll come on to that in a bit. The government's been clear that schools and local authorities need to consider the workload implications of online learning, and have actually committed extra funding to fill any gaps. I know there were a couple of supply teachers, you know, asking questions earlier. There are supply teachers across the country who've actually been out of work for nearly 2 months now. And the government have told her that every supply teacher should be signed up, even if that's just additionality requirements. So schools and local authorities are responsible for ensuring your workload is reasonable, especially at the minute. So if it isn't, raise it, and we can get some supply teachers into work, then that would be great. This is also about your professional autonomy and your freedom to make decisions about pedagogical approach. The statement from the Scottish Government at the bottom there reflects that you should be able to make decisions about how you approach online learning, and that's not just through live learning. You're also not compelled contractually to deliver live lessons. So if that is outside of your comfort zone, and that could be for whatever reason, you don't want to have someone looking into your home, and there are a whole host of reasons around that and sensitivities, then you should raise that with your head teacher and also raise it with your rep. It's also definitely not appropriate for senior staff to be in any lessons to give criticism or scrutiny, not at this time. Okay, so I'm just going to touch briefly on childcare. Lots of these issues will have been resolved now. But even if you're working from home, you might be entitled to apply for a hub place. So don't dismiss that if there is no alternative option. Things like working from home, looking after yourself physically, if you're having any physical symptoms, back pain, neck pain, carpal tunnel syndrome, that sort of thing, do raise that immediately with your head teacher and your rep, because these are serious issues that can kind of escalate and impact your personal life. Finally, are you being asked to go into school without reason? I know that we've had some reopenings at the minute, but it is only staff who are required to support essential activities that should be attending in person. Obviously, the number of teachers going into school will be increased as schools reopen, but there still should be the absolute basic safe surfaces, and that staffing should be reduced to the lowest possible number. So if you're asked to go in and you're not sure that it's necessary, then do push back. Remote learning should be the main delivery model from P4 upwards and senior phase. For the very few secondary students who are going in to complete that essential practical work, the number of students timetabled in school shouldn't exceed 5 to 8% of the secondary school roll, and that figure doesn't include key worker children. Just want to touch on workload again. Some people I know have been asked to juggle in-hub teaching with online teaching on the same day. You can't do 2 jobs at once, so would advise you to raise that as an issue with your head teacher and your rep if that's being asked of you. You are working in different circumstances. It's not business as usual. I know you know that, but I just want to make that clear. There has to be some flexibility in how we adjust to things. We can't just apply the same approach for every single, teacher in the school. There has to be room to manoeuvre. Okay, so with the school reopenings, for those nursery to P3 and secondary phase, I just want to touch on some of the things to watch out for. All of your risk assessments should be updated, school, people and individual. That's to reflect the increased transmission rate of the new variants and the reopenings. It's essential that you're consulted on any updated risk assessments and plans. If your rep is involved in those discussions, they're representing your views as a school, so you can go to them and ask for more information about what's going on. Better yet, have a branch meeting. I'll come on to that. I just want to touch on the national position for school reopenings. Many teachers are looking forward to getting back to schools and we're keen to support school reopenings, but not at all costs. Some areas have said not at all costs and have actually gone on to register local disputes just before Christmas. The local reactions have had a really positive impact on the national position, so don't just accept anything. We need to be keeping a close eye in the next couple of weeks on how these reopenings are going. And we'll certainly be looking at a national level for these to be examined very closely before we reopen any further. We're pushing really hard on the Scottish Government and in the media and at a national level to vaccinate all school staff before full reopening of schools. If schools are the number 1 priority, then make us the number 1 priority. We think this is a straightforward way to ensure school safety, and that this actually resonates with a lot of parents and families too, who just want to see their kids back in schools. We're also campaigning for other measures, funding for proper ventilation in classrooms and medical grade masks for school staff. And fundamentally, staff should feel safe going into the workplace. We'll want to see meticulous analysis, as I said before, on the first phase of reopenings before any further is progressed. We're firmly against any extension to term dates or increase in hours. The impact of the pandemic on mental health of students and staff so far speaks for itself, so we're strongly opposed to that too. Just touching again on current school reopenings, if you have been shielding or you think you should be shielding now, where you weren't before, you should have had an updated individual risk assessment, but you should request one if you haven't. You can go to your GP and speak to them about that, and hopefully you can sit down with your rep and head teacher and negotiate some extra mitigations up to working from home. Even if you've had 1 dose of the vaccine, we know that you can still get coronavirus, and so you must continue to shield even if you've been vaccinated. Pregnant staff should be working from home for 28 weeks. This is the government position. Previously, there was some inconsistency across local associations, across local authorities, sorry. This should be a policy in every local authority now. We've fought hard and won regular testing of teachers, but testing is voluntary, even for those teaching in school. Nobody should be required to undergo testing without consent or be excluded from work if they don't wish to test. But obviously, we would promote testing if you feel you can. Obviously, the mitigations that we're all very used to are continuing 2 metre distancing between adults and children, 2 metre distancing between adults, face coverings, etc. The main change for us is the 2 metre distancing between senior learners in school. For those small number of people who will be going in the senior learners, they should be kept separate from the key worker and vulnerable children. They're 2 separate provisions, and the number of students, the number of those senior learners going in should be reduced to allow that social distancing happening. If there's too many going in, then that needs to be taken into account. Finally, if the mitigations aren't working for you, for whatever reason, things like enhanced hygiene measures, physical distancing and face coverings, you need to raise it collectively as a school branch. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to do that. So just on to the next slide. Great. So it's essential that you work as a branch to deal with issues. The chances are if you're dealing with an issue, then somebody else is feeling the same way. The first step is to identify your concerns. Some of what's been talked about already might be ringing a bell for you. Have you got concerns about workload? Add up the hours that you're working each week. You might be shocked. Ask your colleagues to do the same. Just an estimate, and then you can start to build a picture of what's happening for you and your colleagues. That's just on workload. But the most important thing is to talk to someone else about it. A friend at work, a rep, just an organiser, one of us. See if people feel the same. If your colleagues are starting to feel the same about an issue, then you can work out what you're willing to do about it. If you don't know what the issues are, then get a short survey out to your colleagues in the workplace. It can be anonymous. Work with your rep to do that. You can arrange a short branch meeting and feedback the results. Or you could even have a WhatsApp group. I know that we've got loads of WhatsApp groups on the go at the minute, but having a WhatsApp group is a really quick and easy way to have regular contact with each other about things like health and safety issues and get that information out quickly. Obviously, the usual rules apply when you're engaging with that sort of thing as a professional. If you're not having regular branch meetings, talk to your rep if you're not the rep, but talk to your rep about getting those going, because they are really important, especially when we're all kind of atomised and sitting in our individual homes at the minute, to have regular conversations about how things are going. And again, you might be a really tech savvy person who knows how to deal with things and you are coping. Maybe others don't feel the same. So be that person and reach out to your colleagues. Make sure you find out more information if you don't know. Have a look at your risk assessment. Your school rep should be fully consulted in the development and updating of risk assessments. That's according to Scottish Government, local authority and EIS advice. So you should be familiar with those. Your local authority is making policies, things like online learning policies, parents' evenings. These are all agreed on your behalf by your local association secretary. So make sure that you have a look at those too. And finally, if you've got noticing that an issue is building up, you can raise your concerns together with your senior management team or your head teacher. It's better to do that together and do it collegiately, and then those concerns should be raised in writing. So there's a clear record of issues raised. We know that head teachers are under an awful lot of pressure at the minute, but this is about protecting your health and well-being, and ultimately they are acting on behalf of the local authority as your employer, so do raise any issues with them. Would hope that your concerns would be addressed at that stage, but sometimes they aren't, and then you could consider pursuing an individual or collective grievance, and we would support you to do that along with your LA secretary. So finally, what this all comes down to is empowering you as teaching professionals to envision the kind of changes that you want to see. Ultimately, what are you willing to settle for? We work in a wider school community and we do gain strength from one another. If you come together with your colleagues with a common purpose, you can address workplace issues. And we know that more so at the minute that this is crucial to protecting your health and well-being, your students' health and well-being, and your family's health and well-being. Teaching is a vocation. We want you to grow and build in your profession, you need to take care of yourself in order to do that. You don't want to burn out. We need experienced teachers with all of this amazing expertise to continue in the profession for a long time to come. So always remember there are tried and tested steps in place you can take with your colleagues to make change and make things better. And do that. And you've got the weight of the union with you as well. So just on the next slide, I've popped our contact details. So you just go to that link on the EIS website, and we're always here to listen, to confidentially hear what's going on for you. Even if you just want to scope something out, get in touch, and we can talk about how we can make things better. So thank you for listening. I hope that helps, and I hope to hear from you in future. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Amy. Lots of food for thought there, and mechanisms through which we can raise any collective issues if you have them. I'm aware that we're slightly over time now, so I'm just going to try and wind up our session this evening. There's one other aspect I wanted to mention to you, and it is focusing on health and wellbeing. We're running a series of wellbeing events, and I'll ask, they're called our Wellbeing Matters. Rob has popped the slide up there. Various wellbeing activities every Tuesday evening, and there's going to be a link there. We'll send that out to you. Lots of different things, from topics about food and nutrition, money worries, digital wellbeing. I'm particularly interested. I think there's one on doodling, which I'm really looking forward to developing some artistic skills. So we'll make them available. Feel free to join in and look at them and sign up for them as you were, just to try and give you something different away from school and to make that divide between the working day and your own time. So thanks very much. Thank you all for giving up your time this evening. I'd really like to thank all our speakers tonight, Jodie, Donald, Stephen, Amy, Mary, and I'd like to thank Rob, who's working behind the scenes, putting all the slides up and coordinating all of this, and Lee, our colleague, who has made this available, the online event available for us as well. So thanks to everybody for coming along and for participating so well in this, and I hope you all keep safe and can now go and have some well-deserved rest time. So thanks again. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you.